Good evening. Welcome to Short Story Time Theater with William Baxter. That's me. And tonight's story is Get Yourselves Up to the Hayloft. Once upon a time, on the farmlands of West Pennsylvania, in the autumn of 1793, there lived two brothers by the names of Thaddeus and Tobias Googlesmith, Thad and Toby for short. One day, Thad and Toby were out playing and chasing each other around the Googlesmith barn, round and around and around, when they ran smack dab into their father. Farmer Josiah Googlesmith, who was carrying a musket as though he was expecting trouble at any time. Farmer Josiah looked down at his two sons with a stern look and said, "Get yourselves up to the hayloft and be quick about it. And don't come down until I tell you it's safe to do so." Thad and Toby were not about to argue with their 6'7" father. So they scurried on into the barn and climbed up the ladder to the hayloft. Then they peeked out the window of the hayloft just to see what the heck was going on. They saw their father being joined by other angry farmers carrying muskets as well. You see, all of these farmers had something in common. They all made whiskey with their surplus corn crops that they couldn't get to market for one reason or another, and they made a great deal of money in that venture of theirs. But when America's newly formed U.S. government wanted its take of the profits, the farmers refused to pay whiskey taxes in accordance with the whiskey tax law passed in 1791. And so now things were finally coming to a head. Thad and Toby peered out the window of the hayloft toward the horizon, and they could see a band of U.S. Marshals armed to the teeth and riding their horses in their direction. And so they knew trouble was brewing. This began one of the worst uprisings ever recorded in the annals of American history. The, the one that would put America's newly formed government with its newly written constitution to its ultimate test. Now, Thad and Toby ducked down below the window sill so they could hear what was going on without being seen. They listened as the leader of the U.S. Marshals and one of the ringleaders of the rebellious farmers began to exchange hostile words with each other. The leader of the U.S. Marshals said, "We are federal U.S. Marshals. We are placing you all under arrest for violating the whiskey tax law of 1791 and refusal to pay whiskey taxes. Throw down your weapons and surrender, and no one will be hurt." Then one of the leaders of the uprising replied, "You ain't arresting anyone here today, and we will never surrender. On top of that, you're trespassing. Now get going before we give you wet fur with these musket barrels. Take one more step and a gunfight broke out between the U.S. Marshals and the rebellious farmers. The conflict went on for days, while Thad and Toby remained safely hidden up in the hayloft with plenty of water rations. Later, the two brothers peeked out the window at the hayloft only to see that their beautiful farmlands had quickly turned into a battlefield for one of the worst uprisings since Daniel Shay's rebellion a few years earlier. And the news of the uprising quickly reached the nation's capital, where America's first president, George Washington, was addressing a very large army of militia soldiers. The president said, "Men, we have ourselves a situation out there in western Pennsylvania. Our new Constitution of America will never work if we can't enforce the laws of this Constitution in all of our 13 states. Well, the ultimate test has come, men, as to whether or not we can do it. And our testing ground is right out there in western Pennsylvania. Whether or not we can pass this test depends on whether or not we can put down this whiskey rebellion in short order." So that day, the father of our country dispatched a very large army of 1,000 militia soldiers to West Pennsylvania to crush the Whiskey Rebellion of 1793. And that is exactly what they did. As Thad and Toby peered out the window one last time, they saw hundreds upon hundreds of militiamen descending down upon the farmers from all directions. And after that, they couldn't bear to watch any longer, seeing how badly outnumbered the farmers were. And as the militia chased the farmers around the Googlesmith barn, round and around and around, soon came the silent cease of gunfire, telling Thad and Toby that the Whiskey Rebellion was over, and that it was safe for them to come down out of the hayloft. Farmer Josiah was taken into custody along with other ringleaders of the rebellion, but they were later pardoned by President Washington himself. You might say that the father of our country had a heart, as he too had had a belly full of taxation without representation in earlier years. The Whiskey Rebellion of 1793 was indeed the ultimate testing ground, which determined whether or not America could enforce the laws of its new Constitution. It was a test America and George Washington passed with flying colors. The end. And you all have a good night now, and I'll be back later with another presentation for Short Story Time Theater with William Baxter, me. Good night now.